On today's show, a wild day in NBA free agency, but the roller coaster started well before NBA free agency officially began with the news that Kevin Durant has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. Just how does that impact the Houston Rockets and their timeline owning the Brooklyn Nets draft picks for the next 5 years? We're going to talk about that, the implications from that. We'll also revisit Jae'Sean Tate, his new contract with the Houston Rockets, the incredibly team-friendly deal. We'll take a look at that. We'll also take a look at the winners and losers of free agency. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. As always, we appreciate you for making LOR your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can help us out by commenting on the videos. Remember our motto, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Go comment on YouTube. It helps out the show a ton. So much to talk about on today's show. Kevin Durant requesting a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. A joyous day if you are a Rockets fan and want to see these Brooklyn Nets picks translate to the best possible versions of themselves. We're going to talk about that, the implications from the KD trade request. Also, Jae'Sean Tate inking a brand new deal with the Houston Rockets. 3 years, $22.1 million, an incredible get for this Houston Rockets team. We're going to break down his deal, what that means. We'll also take a look at the winners and losers from free agency and how ex-Rockets general manager Daryl Morey is basically assembling the Philadelphia Rockets up north. We're going to take a look at that further down the line in segment 3. Let's start with the bombshell news that shook the NBA landscape, and that is Kevin Durant requesting a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. It was just a couple days ago we were breaking down the implications of the Brooklyn Nets picks, right? The situation continuing to implode with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. Will Kyrie opt out? Will he leave for nothing? Will the Brooklyn Nets try to run it back one more season and maybe see if they can make something happen with Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant? None of that. It's all out the window. Kevin Durant wants out of this situation. The Rockets have this is hands down the best case scenario for the Houston Rockets. And when you revisit the trade that Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office, pardon me, originally made when dealing James Harden to the Brooklyn Nets, this is hands down the worst possible outcome for the Brooklyn Nets, and yet it is also the best possible outcome for the Houston Rockets. At the time that Rafael Stone dealt James Harden, so many media talking heads were out there saying, this is a terrible trade. This is horrendous. This is all you got back for James Harden in his prime, James Harden. And now we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. Kevin Durant forcing his way out of Brooklyn means that these picks for the next 5 years that the Houston Rockets own. And here's a quick refresher on these picks, right? Starting with next season, the 2023 pick is a right to a pick swap. Then in 2024, it is a full-blown first-round pick from the Brooklyn Nets. 2025 is another swap. 2026 is another full-blown first-round pick. And then 2027 is the final year where Brooklyn owes their first-round pick to the Houston Rockets via a pick swap. And all 5 of those picks are completely unprotected. This was a huge win for the Houston Rockets because now, not only have they jump-started this rebuild by landing a couple top prospects in Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., as well as the insane amount of talent that they've already cultivated in just 18 short months since dealing James Harden. You've got Kevin Porter Jr., Jae'Sean Tate, who just inked a brand new deal that we're going to talk about in segment 2. So he's here for the long-term part of this Rockets rebuild. You've got those two guys. You found gems in Alperen and Sengun, arguably the steal of the draft. Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba. You nailed this draft with Tari Eason and Ty Washington. So many talented individuals. KJ Martin, whose future is a little bit murky possibly here in Houston, but another gem that Rafael Stone and his front office found. So you have all this talent, and you're going to be able to grow a core from the ground up. And now you have the next 5 years of Brooklyn Nets draft picks to have a pipeline of continuing to add young, exciting talent to a budding, young, exciting team here in Houston. I am completely beside myself. This could not have worked out better. If you are the Houston Rockets front office, if you are Rafael Stone, if you're Eli Whitus, if you are the Rockets ownership, hell, even if you're the players, they're probably popping champagne left and right that Kevin Durant asked out. And above all else, we need to point to and thank one Kyrie Irving for being the destabilizing force in Brooklyn that ultimately set a lot of this in motion, right? It wasn't just one thing that had to go wrong for the Brooklyn Nets. It was a snowball effect of this small thing, then this thing, then this thing, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Injuries, the vaccine issue with Kyrie, getting bounced from the playoffs in the first season, KD's toe on the line against the Bucks, like all these different little things that kept growing and growing and growing that destabilized that franchise, so much so to the point that now a lot of people, when Kyrie announced that he was going to be out, or that he was going to, I apologize, that he was going to opt into his contract, right? That he wasn't just going to walk away from the franchise. A lot of people thought, oh, okay, the Nets, they're stable TBD for now. I didn't quite buy into it, right? They could have still dealt Kyrie, right? That was still an option on the table. And here we are, just a few days removed from that. Kevin Durant asking for a trade. I know it's kind of crazy to start with the leading news being Brooklyn Nets news, but this means that the Rockets have absolutely lucked out and could be in a hugely advantageous position for the next 5 years while they are growing their own core that they've cultivated themselves, and then again having all the draft assets by way of the Brooklyn Nets for these next few years. Now, it is important. I do want to throw this one out there, right? It could just be fine and dandy to let the Brooklyn Nets rot, right? They're going to try and deal Kevin Durant. They're going to try and get back the best possible return package. They have no interest in bottoming out and tanking because they have no incentive to do so. They don't own any of their own picks. So the Nets are going to try and still be competitive in whatever deal they get for Kevin Durant. That makes sense, right? Here's where things get really interesting. Maybe, just maybe, there's a scenario where the Rockets look to get re-involved with the Brooklyn Nets as a third-team trade partner to help grease the wheels on a potential Kevin Durant trade, because say you want to send Kevin Durant to the Phoenix Suns or the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics or any number of the 15 to 20 teams that have probably inquired about Kevin Durant, seeing as how it seems like basically half the league has called in to figure out if they have a shot at landing Kevin Durant. If the Rockets are interested in one of the, upstart talented players from any of those teams that I just, possibly listed off, obviously, maybe the DeAndre Ayton one isn't the best analogy or fit. So, excuse me there, but let's take a look at Miami Heat with Bam Adebayo, maybe the Boston Celtics with Jalen Brown, right? Some interesting, young, talented options. If either of those teams were willing to part with either of those players to try and land a guy like Kevin Durant, the Rockets could very easily get involved as a third team to where the Brooklyn Nets could recoup, potentially all of or a portion of their own draft capital, right? Coming back from the Kevin Durant trade, which would then allow them to truly bottom out and rebuild the right way, as opposed to having to be pseudo-competitive with whatever return package they get for KD. The team interested in KD gets Kevin Durant, again, in this, hypothetical, the Celtics or the Heat, whoever. And then not only that, then the Rockets walk away with a really talented player, somebody that would be, again, a player that you'd be comfortable getting in the return, supposedly, for a guy like Kevin Durant, maybe a Bam Adebayo, maybe a Jalen Brown. Again, this isn't a perfect hypothetical here, but it's something where you got to consider the possibilities of the Brooklyn Nets have one choice, and that's to try and get back the best possible package for KD, and then immediately go and try to be competitive with Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and whatever they get back from this trade package. if Kyrie Irving even plays this next season, right? So that's a completely sideways situation. Maybe it's just a little bit more appealing for the Brooklyn Nets to just say, you know what? Let's just go get our draft capital back from Houston. Wherever we decide we're going to send KD, let's see if they have something that the Rockets would be interested in, that they would be willing to then forego some of their draft capital that they own by way of us. And if the Rockets could get a talent like Bam Adebayo or Jalen Brown or somebody on the level of those two players for, most, if not all of the Brooklyn Nets draft capital, that's exactly what you're kind of trying to hope to achieve with those draft picks, right? You're trying to leverage those into an established, talented player or individual that can help elevate this Rockets team to the next level. And if it's somebody that matches or is close to matching the timeline of the Rockets' young core already, why not jump on it right now rather than waiting for some hypothetical scenario further down the line, especially because whatever package the Nets do get back, again, they have zero incentive to tank, so the picks might not be that phenomenal, right? KD asking out is still a godsend for the Rockets. It's still a huge, bonus for this Houston Rockets team, but they might not actually bottom out to be like lottery picks immediately, right? The back end of the picks could still be really, really juicy, but these first couple years, if they get a DeAndre Ayton back, or if they get a guy like a Bam Adebayo or Jalen Brown, any number of these teams that are potentially interested in inquiring about Kevin Durant, they could easily still walk away as a play-in caliber or playoff caliber team in the Eastern Conference. And then we're kind of right back to where we started with those picks, where they're still good picks and it's still nice to have them, but they're not juicy lottery picks where suddenly the Nets are, posting 20-win seasons every single year. So it's worth considering. It's a hypothetical that I'm just throwing out there. It's incredibly exciting news if you're the Houston Rockets. The Rockets walk away as one of the biggest winners, if not the biggest winners on the day of free agency, just by way of the Brooklyn Nets news with Kevin Durant requesting a trade. A huge win for the Rockets and for Rafael Stone. So coming up, I do want to talk about the Rockets and what they actually did accomplish in free agency, re-signing Jae'Sean Tate. We'll also take a look at the winners and losers from free agency. We'll get there after a quick message from our friends over at Arcade 1UP. Because right now, the NBA Jam machine is back with Arcade 1UP. The leader in at-home retro arcade games is not only bringing back the best game ever, but they've made it bigger than ever with a Shaq Edition console. In one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA-licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through the all-new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others, starting at just $399. Check this out. They're also giving away a NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine to a Locked On listener for free. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. Again, that's arcade1up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little Jae'Sean Tate, who inked a brand new deal with the Houston Rockets. So there was, some speculation. Hey, I thought Jae'Sean Tate was just going to be held under the team-friendly deal by the Rockets for another season. It made a lot of sense to do that, but after thinking about it and trying to, kind of walk through the steps and the logic for why they had Jae'Sean Tate, or they declined Jae'Sean Tate's team option and then were able to ink this new deal, they got a better overall deal for Jae'Sean Tate by taking care of him this summer rather than putting it off and waiting until next summer. So he signed for 3 years, $22.1 million, a little over $7 million per year, which is just under kind of what I had placed at his, general market value. Again, I kind of pegged him somewhere in that $8 to $12 million range, and I figured the Rockets would be, because of the cap ramifications for how much they could have actually paid him, they couldn't have gone north of $10 million. So I kind of had them pegged somewhere in that $8 to $10 million range, although again, his value probably in between 8 to 12. So getting Jae'Sean Tate for a little over $7 million per year is an absolute steal for this Houston Rockets franchise. And when you look at the structure of the contract, we don't know the details for it just yet. I would be inclined to believe that there's probably going to be some other reason that they also wanted to get him under this contract this offseason. I'm assuming that there's going to be some level of like either incentives, or maybe they decided to like front load the contract to where it's worth more money here in this very first year and it has like descending value in the next couple seasons. That way the Rockets have a lower cap hit with his contract in next offseason when they're trying to have as much possible cap room to play around with. So that's a possibility as well. Maybe there's some incentives based in there. Maybe there's potentially yet another team option on this deal as well, somewhere on that third year, possibly a little bit further down the line. Maybe there's some non-guaranteed portion of this contract where that final year isn't fully guaranteed or it's just partially guaranteed. I'd imagine that we're going to find out more about this contract in the coming days, the specifics on it and what makes this such an absolute slam dunk deal for the Houston Rockets, because at the end of the day, they could have just held on to him, right? They could have held on to Jae'Sean Tate. They could have just kept him under lock and key one more season on a, $1.5 million contract, super team friendly. But by doing this, now they have team control on him for the next 3 years. And not only that, this is another step in the direction of this franchise showing that they're taking care of their players, right? They didn't have to do this with Jae'Sean Tate. They didn't have to lock him down and guarantee him, this 20-something million dollars for an undrafted, 2 years in the league, type player. They didn't have to do that. Instead, though, they showed him, hey, you're a big part of what we're trying to do here. We appreciate what you bring to the table. We think your skill set is important for what we're trying to grow and cultivate here with this young core. We're going to get you taken care of this offseason rather than push it off until next offseason. Now, Jae'Sean Tate could have easily, been disinterested, right? I mean, it was a team option, but it doesn't I feel like there's maybe some, a lack of leverage here if you're Jae'Sean Tate, because maybe you walk away thinking they could have, he could have made more money next offseason. Maybe that's a possibility, but didn't even look like he, attempted to go out and, survey the market to see what another team out there would be willing to pay him. This very much looked like an amicable situation between the Rockets and between Jae'Sean Tate, where they knew that they wanted to get him on a brand new deal. They wanted to get him on a team-friendly deal, and Jae'Sean Tate understands that this is a great situation for him to be in, to continue to grow, to continue to refine his skills. And by the time this contract is up, Jae'Sean Tate will probably be in line to make the biggest payday of his career at the end of this contract, right? If he plays out all 3 years here in Houston, he'll be 29 years old by the time this contract comes due. That is the perfect time for him to then go out there and secure the bag, either from the Houston Rockets or potentially from another organization. So this continues to give him that opportunity to more than likely probably have a starting role to showcase his skills, to prove that he is one of the premier NBA wing defenders, potentially a premier 3-and-D type threat at the NBA if the improved three ball is to be believed. So I think this is a win if you're the Houston Rockets. When you look at what they needed to accomplish with this NBA free agency, getting Jae'Sean Tate locked down on a team-friendly deal was priority number one the moment it was news that they weren't just going to hold on to him on the remaining team option on his deal. So they absolutely knocked that out of the park. Complete check mark if you're the Houston Rockets. Again, I think a little over $7 million is a great value for what Jae'Sean Tate brings to the table. Now we look at elsewhere in free agency, and the Rockets haven't done anything else. They renounced the rights to Anthony Lamb, to Trevelin Queen, to Bruno Fernando. So those guys are not restricted free agents. So the Rockets didn't have any claim to those guys. Trevelin Queen actually being scooped up by the Philadelphia 76ers, which we will talk about a little bit in segment 3. They didn't make a play for any other free agents yet. Now, we are still early in the free agency period, right? We're going through this first wave of NBA free agents. It's very possible that the Kevin Durant situation kind of threw a wrench into everybody's free agency plans, and there may be some other names out there that could potentially be on the move or are waiting to potentially sign, depending on where KD goes, depending on how that situation resolves itself. But if you're the Houston Rockets, I think you went in with one clear objective, and that was to sign Jae'Sean Tate to get him on a new team-friendly deal. You achieved that objective. Now it remains to be seen if the Houston Rockets will then utilize the non-taxpayer MLE or their biannual exception to bring in a little bit more talent to this Rockets team, maybe bringing in another possible veteran presence, or again, just an established force, maybe to bring in some backup big man help, which is one of the things that I alluded to in our NBA free agency preview for the Rockets. I listed 5 names that the Rockets could potentially be interested in, and 3 of those names are already off the market. We can look at those 3 names right now. The 3 guys actually at the top of my list, or wait, top of my list? Yeah, the 2 guys at the top of my list are now gone. Nick Claxton walked away 2 years, $20 million from the Brooklyn Nets. So that's, a pretty solid get if you're the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, that franchise is in complete limbo right now, trying to figure out what happens with Kevin Durant. So I guess at that point, if you're the Nets, you're just like, you know what, let's just retain the free agents we know we have, and we'll try and figure out how we, pick up all the pieces later on. And then Mo Bamba, 2 years, $21 million to stay with the Orlando Magic. So both of those guys staying with their respective teams, two guys that I had some interest in potentially procuring their services for the Houston Rockets. And then the last guy on this list, Isaiah Hartenstein, who was actually my number 2 target on the Rockets' potential backup big man list. 2 years, $16 million to go play for the New York Knicks, a big-time pickup for the New York Knicks. I love this deal for Isaiah Hartenstein. I'm excited that, he's a guy, right? He's bounced around a little bit. He had his time here in Houston, played with a couple other teams, Denver, Cleveland, really found his home with the LA Clippers. I like that he was able to get this deal from the New York Knicks, but that's 3 targets off the board for the Houston Rockets as far as potential backup bigs go. So Mitchell Robinson still out there, TBD on what his contract looks like, TBD on where or if he signs with somebody. And then Thomas Bryant, another TBD, seeing, whether or not he actually, comes back to the Washington Wizards. So both of those guys still, keep them low key on your Rockets radar. Maybe they decide to do something with either of those two names. Maybe they wait for the market to potentially dry up a little bit and see if there's less money out there and maybe, potentially squeeze those guys to get them on a bit more of a team-friendly deal. So far, I'm a little surprised at the money that was being thrown around to these big men. I think the Isaiah Hartenstein deal is a little bit more in line with what I thought some of these guys were going to get. But Nick Claxton, $10 million a year. Mo Bamba, a little over $10 million a year. Those are solid contracts for both of those guys. With the Rockets, though, it'll be interesting to see what other decisions they decide to make in free agency if they decide to throw a little bit more money at another name or two. Of course, we're going to keep you posted for all of that and more right here at Locked On Rockets. But coming up, I do want to talk about NBA free agency from the just NBA landscape, right? Who are the winners and who are the losers of NBA free agency so far? Not even 7 hours removed from when NBA free agency officially started at the time of this recording. So with that, we're going to get there in just one moment, but first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find out the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. They've got you covered for Major League Baseball, UFC, MMA, boxing, golf, you name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And right now, you can take a look at some interesting props for next season. You can take a look at Jabari Smith Jr., his points per game prop for the regular season next year. Right now, they've got the under listed at 16.5 points per game, the over at 16.5 points per game. Right now, the odds are minus 130 for him to be under the 16.5 number. Right now, plus 100 to be over 16.5 PPG for next season. So you can take a look at that and some other interesting rookie odds for next NBA season. So for all of that and more odds, be sure to check out their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline. It's where the game starts. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, let's talk a little NBA landscape at large, the winners and losers, if you will, of NBA free agency so far to this point. And of course, this is, not a complete winners and losers list. We still got to see who else signs where, but so far it feels like the major pieces of free agency have been taken care of. Jalen Brunson being the most impactful player so far to switch teams in NBA free agency. So let's just we'll go losers first. I'll tell you what, we'll go losers, then we'll go winners, because I want to end on a semi-Rockets related note. So that's a bit of a spoiler for one of the winners of free agency so far. Losers, in my eyes, to this point, we're going to start with the Detroit Pistons, who for some reason, look, Marvin Bagley, reclamation project, trying to figure out if he's got anything in the tank at the NBA level. And he had a decent, little stint with the Detroit Pistons, right? I'm not going to discredit that. However, the Pistons paid him 3 years, $37 million. That's a little over $12 million a year for Marvin Bagley. Why? Who were they competing with to pay $12 million a year to Marvin Bagley? I feel like that is a huge overpay if you're the Pistons. Look, they've got a ton of salary cap room to play around with. This just seems like an irresponsible decision at the end of the day. This seems, eerily reminiscent of the Mason Plumlee signing from a couple seasons ago, where you're kind of scratching your heads, or you're like, what are the Pistons doing? They just have an affinity for overpaying big men, I guess, at this point. So I don't want to give, I guess I don't want to give them they didn't catch like a gigantic L, but it's more just an anomaly, kind of a head scratcher, pardon me, where I do think that it is not the smartest move if you're the Detroit Pistons. Maybe they just use him as, trade fodder, salary filler further down the line. So that's a possibility. The actual biggest loser so far of the NBA free agency period has to be the Dallas Mavericks for a couple different reasons. One, they lost Jalen Brunson to the New York Knicks, who walk away with Brunson on a 4-year, $104 million deal, a huge win for the New York Knicks. So that's one of the winning teams there. So they lose Jalen Brunson, who was a big part of their run to the Western Conference Finals this past season. Suddenly, if you're the Dallas Mavericks, Christian Wood is your second best player. And I don't know about you, but if Christian Wood was my second best player, I'd be a little concerned about the true ceiling of a team like that. The Mavericks, it feels like they took a step and a half or a couple steps forward this past season, and they're taking a pretty huge step back by losing Jalen Brunson. It's unfortunate. They were poised to really potentially make some noise next season by adding Christian Wood without losing any rotation players and getting Tim Hardaway Jr. returning to that lineup. Now, you've got Tim Hardaway Jr. coming back and you're adding Christian Wood, yes, but losing Jalen Brunson is going to hurt that Dallas Mavericks team quite a bit. Not only that, they signed JaVale McGee to a 3-year, $20.4 million deal. And I feel like that's kind of an overpay for JaVale McGee. If you had other guys out there like Nick Claxton and Mo Bamba going for $10 million a year, and if Hartenstein could net $8 million a year, I feel like $8 million a year, or I guess just under, right? 8 million, 7 million, just under 7 million. There we go, for JaVale McGee is maybe that's fair market value, but it also just seems like a lot to pay to him unless you're planning to throw him out there in the starting lineup, which apparently JaVale McGee was, quoted on ESPN, or somebody quoted him somewhere saying that he does plan to start at the center position for the Dallas Mavericks. So maybe they're planning to trot out JaVale McGee and Christian Wood as their front court. I don't know. That situation seems all kinds of iffy. So I've got the Pistons with the overpay of Bagley, and then the Mavericks for losing Brunson and then maybe overpaying JaVale McGee as the two losers in my book so far of the NBA free agency period. The winners I'll start with a sneaky winner here, and that's the Minnesota Timberwolves, who got Kyle Anderson on a 2-year, $18 million deal. That is an absolute steal if you're the Timberwolves. Getting Kyle Anderson at that kind of money for a Timberwolves team that could absolutely use a guy with his skill set, his playmaking ability, the way he kind of slows the game down, that is going to be huge for that Timberwolves team. I think that's an insane pickup, and it's going to be kind of one of those under-the-radar pickups that doesn't really start to shine until like midway point next season, where you look up and you're like, oh, hey, the Timberwolves are a lot better and more composed than we remember them being, and a lot of it has to do with Kyle Anderson. So I love that signing for them. I also think the Knicks walk away feeling pretty good about this offseason, about this NBA free agency period. They got their guy in Jalen Brunson. A bit of a weird dynamic there, kind of rolling out the red carpet as if he were like an A-tier free agency prospect, and he's realistically like a B-tier player at best. But the Knicks get their guy, right? And that's the guy that they really wanted to go after in free agency. So I think you have to chalk that up as an absolute win for them. And so far, he's the biggest name that has switched teams in the NBA free agency period. So I'll have to give the Knicks credit there. And then getting Isaiah Hartenstein at $8 million a year, couple years there. Really solid deal for Hartenstein, really solid place for him to be in New York. And because the Knicks picked up Hartenstein, I doubt they bring back Mitchell Robinson. It'll be interesting to see what teams decide to throw a little bit of money at him. Again, potentially the Houston Rockets, so we'll keep our eyes on that. A quick honorary mention here to the Milwaukee Bucks, who have decided to basically just run everything back. They re-signed Portis, they re-signed Wesley Matthews, they re-signed Javon Carter, and they brought in Joe Ingles, who is, again, a pretty solid addition to this Bucks team because they're just running things back. They allow Joe Ingles the ability to kind of rehab his injury, and if he can get back to some semblance of his pre-injury self, that is a great pickup for the Milwaukee Bucks, a guy that you can bring off the bench. He's not going to have nearly the responsibility that he did with the Utah Jazz, shouldering that offensive burden that he did at times as the point forward for them. He's somebody that can kind of give them an additional playmaker, another look if he can get back to, again, his pre-injury self. So I think the Milwaukee Bucks, I'm not going to chalk them, throw them in with the winners of free agency so far, but I like what they've done from just a general standpoint. Last winner here, and that has to be the Philadelphia 76ers. Shout out to Rockets ex-general manager Daryl Morey, a bit of a polarizing figure within the Rockets fandom at this point, but Morey is currently constructing the Philadelphia Rockets by signing PJ Tucker, Daniel House Jr., and Trevelin Queen. At this point, if you've worn a Rockets jersey ever as an NBA player, you probably have a shot at playing for the Philadelphia 76ers. So he got PJ Tucker on a 3-year, $33.2 million deal, a great value deal if you were PJ Tucker to be able to snag that kind of money at 37 years old. Shout out to PJ Tucker for securing the bag. Fully guaranteed deal, 3 years at 37 years old. He's going to be walking away a very, very rich man. And again, he gets to reunite with Daryl Morey and, of course, his bestie, James Harden. So love that for PJ Tucker. I was shocked by the addition of Daniel House Jr., not going to lie. I thought that, the animosity between James Harden and Daniel House Jr. was probably too insurmountable for those two to become teammates again after the whole Disney bubble situation during the series against the Lakers, the COVID tester incident, all of that. Maybe that's water under the bridge. Maybe James Harden said, you know what? I don't care. He's a good 3-and-D wing. Go out there and get him. He can help us win. Maybe this is just a testament to how badly James Harden wants to win, is he's just, water under the bridge, get in here, do your job, be serious, and I don't care what happened in the past. All right, so 2 years, $8.5 million for Daniel House Jr., a great get for him. Very, very solid value contract for House. And then Trevelin Queen signing with the Sixers, a 2-year, $3.4 million deal. Again, the reigning G League MVP, played with the RGV Vipers, had a bit of a stint here with the Rockets. Again, the Rockets did not extend a qualifying offer to him, did not make him a restricted free agent, so his services are being procured elsewhere. Queen really didn't have a spot on this Rockets team, so I'm happy to see him get a shot somewhere else, especially in a situation like the Philadelphia 76ers, where he's going to get a chance to play off of guys like James Harden, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey. Hopefully it's a really, really, positive overall situation for him. But I give them a win for this because in addition to all this, James Harden is also reportedly going to be taking less money on his new deal that he's planning to sign this weekend with the Philadelphia 76ers in order for them to have the money necessary to make these moves at the margin to allow the signing of a guy like PJ Tucker, to allow the signing of a guy like Daniel House Jr. So it'll be interesting to see just how much money James Harden is electing to give up, to forego, to form a better, well-rounded Philadelphia 76ers team. The last piece of the puzzle, though, if the Rockets are recreating that 2018-2019 team that, fell a little bit short, unfortunately, under Daryl Morey's reign, they got to add Eric Gordon as the last piece of the puzzle there. And it just so happens that late Thursday night, at the time of my recording this, I apologize for who, because I can't give credit. Somebody shared on Twitter that apparently Danny Green was in a space on Twitter and basically said that the Sixers are trying to get Eric Gordon to become a Philadelphia 76er. Like Danny Green himself, legitimately the player, Danny Green, was on Twitter saying that they're going after EG. Maybe you take it with a grain of salt. Who knows how informed Danny Green is, but it's no secret that the Houston Rockets have been taking phone calls about Eric Gordon. Remains to be seen where he ultimately potentially gets dealt. It seems like he is the next logical domino to fall if you're the Houston Rockets. So maybe there's a complete reunion up in Philadelphia of the Rockets of old, and James Harden is just hell-bent on winning that 2018-2019 Rockets team a championship. And unfortunately, it won't happen with the red color. Well, I guess the Philadelphia 76ers have that red alternate, right? It won't happen in a Rockets jersey, but because the 76ers have zero ties to the Brooklyn Nets picks that are currently owned by the Houston Rockets, I have no qualms about rooting for that Sixers team to come out on top in the Eastern Conference and for James Harden to potentially win a chip with all of his former Houston Rockets teammates. So I would love Eric Gordon to become a member of the 76ers. I'd love to see what kind of trade offers they could potentially construct to make an EG trade worthwhile. If they can get Houston a future first-round draft pick, then hey, I am all for it, and I would wish Eric Gordon the absolute best of luck being reunited with James Harden in Philadelphia. I do think that the Kevin Durant situation, all signs are pointing towards him going to the Phoenix Suns. Right now, that is the odds-on favorite for the team to walk away victorious from the Kevin Durant sweepstakes this offseason, which does, unfortunately, put a bit of a damper on the idea of dealing Eric Gordon to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for, to possibly reunite him with Chris Paul in exchange for some future draft capital. So I think we're probably going to have to pump the brakes on that hypothetical, at least for now, unless something else changes and KD, another suitor emerges that makes a little bit more sense as a destination for Kevin Durant. So with that, those are the initial reactions and thoughts to the wild roller coaster that is NBA free agency. The Rockets walk out absolutely victorious, even though they only made one signing and they brought back Jae'Sean Tate. They walk away probably maybe the biggest winners of the day with the KD news. And Rafael Stone and the entire Rockets front office can feel incredibly triumphant and have a sense of vindication that what they did with the James Harden trade was the right move. And hey, people should stop doubting Rafael Stone, right? He has proven pretty regularly now, pretty consistently, with the one, little sideways trade of Victor Oladipo to the Miami Heat for Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley and a future pick swap. Aside from that one move, a lot of Rafael Stone's moves have been pretty damn good. So with that, I leave you with those final thoughts. How do you feel about free agency period so far? How do you feel about Kevin Durant asking for a trade and requesting out of Brooklyn? Let me know how you feel about the Jae'Sean Tate contract, all of it. Let me know all of your thoughts on NBA free agency and this wild 24 hours that we just experienced in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those comments every single day. Again, you can check out the show on all podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app. We are on YouTube. Search Locked on Rockets on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.
Thank you.